Have to make sure I set it up right. Don't remember. Live dashboard. JR, I think we're live. We should be live, hopefully. Um, how have you been? What are you up to?
I've been good. I've been learning another language, so my brain's like scrambled eggs by the end of the day. But having fun, doing good. I can still do that even though we're all in lockdown. So
Yeah, one of the few things we can still do.
yeah.
You wanted to have a conversation about
How
something?
about you?
I'm not the best, but it's all right.
Yeah. So I'm sorry to hear that. Yeah. So we had a conversation a year ago, and I thought it might be fun to pop in again and talk now that I've seen. I think I've seen most of the thing that involves dinosaurs or the flat Earth. I don't watch, but um, yeah. So I thought I'd just ask you some questions that I had from uh, listening to different discussions and just see where we go in the realm of philosophy and apologetics. I'm not an apologist or a philosopher, but interested in both, and I am a theist.
Sure.
So the I think the last full one I saw was you talking with about Pascal's wager with Liz Jackson.
Mm-hmm.
And in that one, you said that if you died and went to heaven and came back, that would be a good reason to believe in heaven, but no one else would believe your testimony. Uh, was that like for the sake of argument, or would you say that experiencing heaven would be a good reason to believe in it?
Yeah, sure. Experiencing it would be a good reason if it was like realistic enough.
Really? Okay, so you would not feel the need to have empirical verification
Well, that would
to
be
differentiate it?
that would be sort of empirical because you experienced it, but no one else would be able to verify it, and you may not have really good reason to show it's not imaginary, but you would it would probably be compelling for you, so it would be sufficient in that way.
Interesting. Okay. Wow. I didn't realize that. So then the argument about needing empirical verification to differentiate between what's imaginary and what's real would apply. You would apply applies mainly to like testimony and so on.
Yeah, for the most part, like if you want to believe something else, there's definitely cases where you want to make sure that what you saw is real and not just imaginary. And so, if you wanted to really justify your experience, then you would still need that for it to be justified. But you could just choose to believe it based off of that. Like if I experienced that, I'd choose to believe it even if it wasn't justified. So it would still require empirical justification to be a reasonable belief, but I would believe it if I actually saw it.
Yeah. Wow. We agree a lot more there than I thought we would. So uh, that's uh, that's interesting. Uh, yeah. You surprised me with that one. Interesting. Okay, great. You also said that at least I think you said in that discussion, that you agreed we should cultivate belief as far as what would maximize our well-being,
Hmm.
which would be the premise of like decision theory or and Pascal's wager, right? So, like, I don't think there are studies that show this, but if studies suggested Christianity or Buddhism, for example, believing in Buddhism maximized your well being, would you then attempt to believe in Buddhism?
Maybe sort of, but the point of that maximizing the well-being thing is like there's a presumption that you're going to die at some point and what's going to happen to you afterwards. So it's not a question about what you do in life, because what you do in life and determining what your well-being is pretty subjective. So that's kind of just up to you what you decide to do in life. But the question is what happens after life if you do something and have a it's pretty cut and dry. If you die and you have an afterlife, that's good. That's a good thing. So,
Yeah. So the eternal stakes, you would definitely say,
well,
you
just
know,
if you die and you have some afterlife, whether it's eternal or not doesn't make a difference. It's like it could be a temporary afterlife and it have the same consequences.
okay. But you're not necessarily sold on we should cultivate beliefs as far as what would maximize well-being in this life.
Well, I do agree with that. That's true. Just maximizing well-being is just totally subjective. It's up to you in this life. There's no measure of that at all.
Got it. So you could essentially say someone could say, "Oh, I believe in Hinduism because it makes me feel good, and I think it gives me the best life I would have." And you would say, "Okay, sure, go for that, bro."
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay, interesting. Huh. What about let's say the Matrix? You're there, and Morpheus is offering you blue pill or red pill. Which one would you take?
Um, Probably subjective. Depends on the time frame. Like if I had a good life, I'd take the one that keeps me in the matrix, and if I had a bad one, I'd take the other one. I forget which one is which.
Interesting. Yeah, interesting. Because I feel a strong uh, moral pull against taking the blue pill. My moral intuition is like, no, you have to take the red pill, and you have to find even if the truth is terrible, you have to take it. Your moral intuition doesn't come into play there.
No, I don't think like finding the truth is an interesting hobby, but it doesn't make any difference to life at all for the most part. Most truths don't have any significance to your life for the most part. Like
Wow. Yeah, that's interesting because I have such a strong sense that the truth is the most effective thing.
definitely
And
not. Definitely not. So
yeah,
that's like the Plantinga's evolutionary argument against naturalism is that our brain makes up a whole bunch of fictions to construct on reality, and that's what it gives us as perceptions. And so reality itself really isn't that important to our daily lives. Like we all fallacies, biases, illusions, delusions, most religious beliefs, they're all religious beliefs. They're all just fictions that we've made up in our head for the purposes of making it easier to live. They have nothing to do with truth. It's just about society and making it easier to move on in life for the most part. The truth is only useful if we can like scientifically do something with it.
huh. So yeah, so this is something I don't think I've heard you talk as much about, and that's very interesting. So would you say we should try to cultivate like there are people out there, they tend to be idealists, but who would say, oh, we should practice kind of self-hypnosis and seek to bend the reality we experience with our beliefs as much as possible. And that seems like the kind of thinking most atheists, well, maybe forget that. It just seems like the kind of thinking based on on previous discussions I've seen you in wouldn't seem attractive to you. But you wouldn't have any issue with that?
I think people should live however you want to live. It's just its choice is my metric of ultimate morality. Just choose to do whatever you want to do for the most part.
Yeah.
So you can do whatever you want. If you enjoy it, go for it. Life is miserable. Go do whatever you can to make it less miserable.
Okay. Well, I have plenty of questions about morality for you, but let's back up a second because I had a couple more. Um, yeah, if and before we jump into the more morality questions, so let's say the red pill thing. Um, I don't know how well you remember the Matrix, but based off of your memory, do you think Neo would be epistemically justified in believing the Matrix was real?
Probably.
Not not the Matrix. Whenever he gets red pilled, or on the way to getting red pilled, do you think like that evidence is would be sufficient for him to think, oh, the world around me is this?
Yeah, both of the worlds, both the real world or the Matrix world that he lived in, made consistent testable predictions that were repeatable for everyone around him. So that was justified for him to believe that was real. And then when he woke up in the Matrix, that made consistent testable predictions that that was real. So he was justified in believing both of those were real at the time he was in them.
Yeah, but he didn't do in the Matrix world. He didn't do any.
Sure, he did. He
Uh,
did tons of them. Like, if the Matrix is real, I can jump across a building or something. Or if the
I
Matrix is
see.
real, I can go to the store and buy a steak and eat a steak or whatever. Or if I get
I
shot, it'll
see.
hurt. So all of those were testable predictions, which were empirically verified.
Huh. Okay, so you would say like his journey to discovering I'm in the Matrix, he's kind of accepting things provisionally and going along with it, and kind of performing tests as he goes until and kind of at each stage, one would assume his confidence in what's going on increases, and he um, he's putting a reasonable amount of belief for the epistemic justification he has.
Yeah, I mean, just everyday life. If there was a unicorn that existed in my backyard every day, and I could go pet it, and I could bring my friends to pet it, and I could charge them money, and they'd pay me, that would be reasonable justification to believe in unicorns. So yeah.
Yeah. Huh. Okay. Interesting. Yeah. All right. Well, let's jump ahead before we talk about morality. I also had questions about Pete Enns, but you might have already answered these questions for me, actually. But I was surprised at how gracious you were to him. Um, but maybe I shouldn't have been, based off of this conversation so far, because it seems to me, and maybe you took what he was saying differently, but it seemed to me that he was pitching or espousing fideism, like he just kind of he had some what I think he would describe them as low level experiences with God, and he's just choosing to believe, but he has a fairly low confidence. Is that do you think that am I right there in what he said?
Yeah, I actually mentioned that to him. He wouldn't call himself a fideist, but I interpreted it the same way, and I think fideism is perfectly reasonable. If you want to choose to believe, go for it. My only contention, like the point of my YouTube channel, is to debunk arguments that we can definitively prove are false. So, like all of the religious apologist arguments, we know definitely do not work. They all fail completely objectively. And so they're bad reasoning, like flat earth reasoning. And so we can demonstrate that. And so my only contention with apologists is when they claim an objectively false thing that we can prove is false, I'm going to say, nope, that's false. But if you just want to choose to believe, I have no problem with that. I have no problem with you choosing to live however you want to live. If you want to believe you're the most brilliant person in the world, go for it. I don't care if you have evidence or not. It's irrelevant. It would only be contradictory to say you have a belief and you have evidence to support that belief. And then I'm going to talk about the evidence. I really don't care what your belief is. It's totally fine. You can choose to believe whatever you want.
Yeah. And so let's say there was somebody who's like, hey, I believe this kind of describes me. I believe because I had an experience with God. If you have an experience with God, you should believe too. If you don't have an experience with God, I don't know that there are good reasons to believe. You would
Um,
probably be,
I would disagree with the second statement. First one's perfectly fine. Um,
which is the second one?
if you have an experience with God, you should believe too. Like whatever.
See,
So choosing to believe is subjective. You can choose to believe for whatever reason you want, whether you have an experience or not. But whether or not that's compelling to someone else is completely different. And it depends on the kinds of experience and the repeatability of the experience. And is it testable for other people? There's all kinds of criteria that you would have to go through to realize, is this reasonable for someone else to believe or anyone in general to believe? The epistemic standard is not just you had an experience and that's reasonable, but you
got
could,
it.
it's the first statement is fine. You had an experience. You can choose to believe for whatever reason you want. There's no problem there. So again, my only contention is there an objectively wrong, unjustified claim about evidence? And that's what my interest is in.
Got it. Yeah, I think I would agree with what you said about personal experience. I think Mormons, that's their whole thing is, well, I guess there you had did you have an Mormon apologist on, or was it somebody else?
Yeah, Kwaku,
I think
Kwaku.
right. So he's a little different, but normally Mormons talk about the burning in the bosom and so on. I just think rational defeaters for Mormonism are so overwhelming. But
I feel the
uh,
same way about Christianity.
I set you up for that. Well, okay. So on the subject of fideism, what about William James? He wrote The Will to Believe. So he argued uh, that there was this criteria for which you could believe something, and it would be you did not have to have justification for it to be rationally held. And his criteria. Let's see if I remember them off the top of my head. I can pull them up real quick if I don't. But he said it has to be a live option versus a dead. So live would mean you could see yourself believing it. It's somewhat credible or appealing to you. Momentous versus trivial. It's something that's really important, could change your life. And then the last one is forced. Uh, is it a forced choice? Meaning, so he would argue belief in God is a forced choice because you either believe or you don't. So he would be on that side of the whole atheism definition argument against. So he's like, hey, if it's a momentous forced choice and belief is a live option, you could believe without needing any justification. I don't know if you've heard of or thought about that before. Any thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, it just wouldn't be justified. You can believe whatever you want for whatever reason you want. It's just not a justified belief. It's not epistemically grounded. It has no basis in reality. It's just, but you can believe whatever you want. So the question would be: does he mean that that's a justified belief without any justification? And usually that's the way it's interpreted, and the answer would be no. It's just his subjective feeling about what he thinks is fine, and he can do that. But again, it's just not epistemically justified.
Huh. I think his whole argument is that that belief can be rationally held, even if you don't have justification. Now, I mean, I think there's an assumption that we're in the absence of defeaters. Um, Largely, you would be talking about contentious issues,
Yeah, it's
like
the absence of defeaters thing is just a burden of proof fallacy because we can take any one of his statements that take all of his criteria, say it's a God thing of some kind, and then just replace that with an alternative God thing, or the opposite God, and you get the exact same result. So, which makes it reasonable to believe both his belief and the exact opposite belief, or the negation of that belief, or something like that. So it doesn't provide any justification at all because the whole point of justification is to be able to differentiate the real from the imaginary, not to make you feel good about the afterlife. So his criteria is just this is going to make me feel good, but it doesn't tell us anything about truth at all. So it gives us no justification concerning reality. It's just what makes us feel good.
okay, you broke up a bit there, which is probably my internet. Um, yeah, so
To summarize, the justification needs to be a justification about reality, not a justification about our feelings. So we can't be justified about believing something about reality just because it would be beneficial to us or make us feel good.
yeah, and I think he's aiming at a low bar. I think he's saying you can do this and be rational, rather than saying a higher bar of epistemic justification. But
Well, yeah, I'm
I
saying the same thing. To be rational,
yeah,
to rationally believe something about reality, you would have to have some justification that it's true about reality, not just it makes you feel good. So you're not
yeah,
rational in believing something that makes you feel good is true about reality just because it makes you feel good.
yeah. What if you've weighed the evidence and it seems like 50? It's a 50-50. It's a coin toss kind of decision.
Well, then
And then
the rational thing would always be follow the evidence wherever it leads. So it would just stay 50-50. It wouldn't be rational to pick one or the other. It would just be a emotional decision.
yeah, what if it's a forced choice though? You have to
Well, that has
choose
nothing
one.
to do with rationality. Again, truth and reality don't care about our lives in these sense. It wouldn't be rational. It would just still just be emotional. I'm going to die, so I better pick one because it's beneficial to me. It has nothing to do with reality. It doesn't tell us anything about what's true. It's just I'm going to choose to do this because I want the reward, the potential possibility of reward. But it has nothing to do with truth or reality. So it wouldn't be justified or rational in any sense. It would just be an emotional decision.
Interesting. Because I think now we're back in Pascal's wager, and so perhaps I've formulated it incorrectly, or
Yeah, no, that's
um,
true. That would be Pascal's wager. So Pascal's wager,
yeah,
choosing the thing that's most beneficial to you is again beneficial for you. So it would be rational for your life, but it's not rational in concerns with reality. So there's two different criteria there. So I would say I would still choose to try and get the reward, but it's not a rational decision. It has nothing to do with reality.
yeah, yeah. I see what you're. Um, I see what you're saying. Although like if in one's estimation the evidence really is equal on both sides, and by not making a decision is made, which would be like you can either choose to attend the class or not, and you say, oh, I'm gonna, and the class is at 3 o'clock, and you're like, well, I'm gonna withhold judgment, and 301 comes around and you've decided not to attend, right? Even by withholding judgment. So in that sense, there's a forced choice.
It doesn't
Um,
make a difference. Again, so it's that you follow the evidence
okay.
wherever it leads, and if it's a 50-50 exactly, you make no judgment. You just sit there and do nothing until it gives you one way or the other. That would be the rational scientific thing to do. Just look for more evidence and then withhold judgment until you have it.
Okay. Okay. Let's jump into some questions about uh, morality. Yeah, your system of morality is all built around choice. Um, yeah, I have a whole bunch of questions that I'm not sure where to attack them from. But so there are a number of moral intuitions that people seem to have that don't seem to directly connect to imposition of will, as far as I can tell. For instance, a lot of people's moral intuitions about sexual morality, uh, you know, is it seems like no imposition of will means as long as people consent, there's nothing wrong. So are those moral intuitions just erroneous?
Yeah, for the most part, like we know moral progress has changed our moral intuitions over time. So we used to think slavery was fine. Lots of things that eating meat, eating animals, now vegetarianism is taking a moral fore, forerunning position. Different political theories. There's a whole bunch of things we thought were okay. Like we used back in tribes, we'd kill people who would come up to our tribe, and we didn't know them. We thought that was perfectly justified because if we didn't, they would kill us. So there's lots of things that we thought were morally fine, women's rights, LGBT rights, that are now completely immoral due to moral progress. So the things that are my argument is that given moral progress, we see a pattern, and that pattern is always choice, and that our current perceptions about what is morally justified regarding restricting choice is only due to those technological limitations that we have, usually, or sociological limitations that we have. And as soon as those go away, people will stop seeing that as immoral completely. It'll just go away. So it seems to follow the pattern of choice, and I take that to the extreme, which goes beyond our current limitations, our current intuitions, into what our intuitions would be in the future given some certain sociological, technological state. And so at the end of the road, when we have no sociological, technological limitations, it's going to be all choice. Choice is the only standard. And all of our intuitions are going to follow that completely, not just like it is today, where it's just mostly choice.
Okay, interesting. So whenever people have asked you what evidence, you know, pushes you towards objective morality, you say moral intuition and moral progress. Uh, and I was kind of unclear as to how moral intuition as evidence gets us to an abstract ideal, but it sounds like you're just taking it as evidence of some kind of objective morality. But most moral intuitions people experience, you don't put much stock in, or
Well, I think most are right. I just think there's a some percentage of them are wrong. So I don't think most I would discount because most of them would align with my model. It's only a select few that usually wouldn't. I think you cut out again. So yeah,
okay,
mine most moral intuitions
yeah,
would agree with my model. So I'm
yeah,
using most of them, but only a few of them would disagree. It's not like
yeah,
most of them disagree.
okay, huh, okay. Well, um, maybe something there'll be some areas of moral disagreement, uh, or moral problems that'll help me flesh it out a lot, because it seems like your moral system is it's really utilitarian. um, so let's say there's somebody who has barely barely repressible urges to cannibalize people. And there are people in the desert, and he comes upon a corpse. He doesn't find anybody else around. Would it be immoral for him to eat the corpse?
Nope.
Okay. Huh. What about if he just decides to copulate with the corpse? Would that be immoral?
Nope.
Yeah. See, and that's where I'm like, ooh, you're there. And I know moral disgust is not a great measure, but it is something that's people experience very profoundly. Uh, so would you appeal to something else to explain those moral intuitions?
Yeah, those are just the sociological limitations. They'll be gone essentially in several hundred years at least.
Okay. Huh.
I mean,
Okay.
yeah,
Well,
we have lots of very strange feelings about things due to our evolutionary biology. Like if we killing someone who entered the village who we didn't know, we would see that as morally right, and if we let them go, it would cause us the same kind of moral disgust because of the fear of how it would kill us. It's just a reaction of how um, sociologically we've developed through evolution. That has nothing to do with morality at all. It's all just weird.
yeah. And so I guess I thought your system, your model of objective morality was providing more explanations than it actually does. So it seems like it's mainly explaining um, uh, what what objective morality is, and it does give an ideal, some kind of ideal to people for people to, but it's not necessary. Like you're appealing to a lot of the same things moral relativists would appeal to explain a lot of our moral intuitions.
Well, yeah, our moral intuitions, a lot of them are just evolutionary based. So we know what causes all of these feelings. That's not really up for debate. My position is just to explain what would objective morality be, not try to explain where we got these feelings, because where we got them is obviously evolution.
Interesting. Okay, but uh, wouldn't our sense of objective morality that would arise from, you're saying, a real objective morality that exists out there, right?
Well, objective morality, in my sense, abstract objects or abstract conceptions can be objective. Like I consider math to be objective and logic to be objective in most senses. So it doesn't need to exist out there to be objective. It can still just be a construct of our mind and still be objective, as long as it refers to something independent of the mental construction. So like 1 + 1 = 2 is objective because it refers to reality, as opposed to 1 + 1 = 5. That would be not objective, which is wrong. And sentences can be objective, like I am a person instead of I am a space leprechaun. Like one of those sentences is objectively true and one of them isn't. So I think that moral statements can be objectively true because they refer to something. Um, and that's where I go with objective morality. I don't really care about where it came from. Where it came from doesn't make a difference. Like how we learned about math doesn't make a difference. It's objectively true regardless of how we got it.
Yeah, I agree with you completely about what objective morality in that sense means. But I guess I'm not making the connection between you're saying moral intuition and moral progress are the evidence that objective morality exists. And that's the connection I'm to the objective morality that you're holding up. Does that make sense? And we probably broke up a bit too.
Yeah, so just like when we see things fall, it's objective, it's evidence of gravity. When we experience morality, it's evidence of morality, but that doesn't mean all experiences are, because we still have delusions. So we can have delusions of things falling, which aren't evidence of gravity. So there's no problem with having some intuitions that are evidence of or guide us toward objective morality and some that don't. You just have to figure out which ones are which.
Okay, yeah. So you would say we experience morality as objective, and that's reflective of the truth that there is objective morality out there.
Well, I wouldn't say that. I'd say we
No.
experience morality. And the reason morality is objective is like referring to an ideal world in my sense, and that's what makes it objective. It's not just we don't experience it as objective. That doesn't mean anything. We just experience it, just like we experience gravity.
Uh, oh, I guess I misunderstood then what you meant by moral intuition as evidence that morality is objective. Because my understanding is, whenever
No, so
what I
so moral intuitions and moral progress are just things that we experience. The evidence that it's subjective is that the moral progress seems to follow a specific pattern in a specific direction, leading to a specific conclusion.
got it. Okay, so you're actually you're plotting the chart of moral progress and saying this is what we arrive at. We're going to arrive, and you're kind of making a prediction as well. We're going to arrive at this absolute best of all possible worlds is no imposition of will,
Yep,
and you know, if you're right, decades from now you'll be more vindicated than you are today.
yep, that is exactly it.
Okay. Uh, it seems to me, and again, this is just a ground level. Maybe it's not ground level, but a strong, basic intuition I have that whatever ideal exists, we should strive for. Um, so if, and this is kind of the is ought question. Um, I guess, but uh, even the sense that morality exists, that some sort of real or objective morality exists, seems to place dictates on our lives. Like we should orient our lives towards that. Would you agree, or would you say again, this is well, you're just free to do whatever you want?
Well, again, so morality in mine is descriptive. So it would say if you do X, you are moral, or if you do X, you are not moral. It doesn't tell us you ought to do anything. It has no obligation. It would say this is a descriptive thing about you. Like if you play basketball, you're a basketball player. So if you kill someone, you're immoral. If you save someone, you're moral. It has nothing to do with the oughts. Really don't play any role into it. Oughts don't matter to objective measures of anything. So, like if you objectively
Yeah.
measure my height, it doesn't matter what I ought to do, whether I ought to be higher, or ought to be taller, or ought to be shorter. It doesn't make a difference. It's just a description of my height, and that's what makes it objective. So, in morality, it would be the same thing. It'd just be a description of what you are, moral or immoral, and the oughts are just irrelevant. It is not important to what morality is.
Yeah, but if this ideal is just conceptual, why um, why are we on this chart of moral progress that you see? That's I guess
Evolution,
that's the evolution. So
yeah,
how is evolution guiding us towards this concept?
no idea. It could just be coincidental, but that doesn't make a difference to my model. I don't care.
Okay, well that's the part that's really interesting to me. I think people who believe in objective morality as God given would say, "Oh, well, God's revealing, um, this morality to us," and they would see that as a significant part of evidence for them. And so that's kind of the piece that's interesting. I mean, I think a having an ideal, a conceptual ideal that people orient towards as an objective morality is actually brilliant. I think it, and I don't think it's that far away from, um, yeah, a concept of morality that I would have. But how it gets communicated to us, or why we have any awareness of it, or why we're moving in that direction, is the part that doesn't make sense.
Well, again, the why we're moving that direction doesn't matter much. It's not. It's like, why are we moving? Why are we in a what is it? A tribe that travels in a certain direction. Why are we moving in that direction? Like, who cares? It doesn't make a difference. We can make up stories for it, but that's not really relevant to the question. It's just what's at the end of the road. So they're two different questions. Like why we're doing it, which is going to have some kind of naturalistic evolutionary response of why we're doing it. And it was purely may or may not be coincidental. And there are different species who may go in different directions depending on how their evolution worked. But that has no relevance to mine. Like I don't care if we like again like the just discovery of gravity. Like I don't care if we acknowledge gravity, if we're moving towards gravity, if we're moving in a direction, makes no difference. Like why is the Earth traveling in and why is our solar system traveling in this direction and not that direction? Like who cares? It doesn't make a difference. The point is just gravity's objective. And so morality is the same kind of a thing. Asking why we're going in a specific direction is more of a subjective thing and really not relevant to the general concept of gravity that we're going in this particular direction.
Yeah, that that's actually very helpful to me because I think seem to dead end with people, especially when it gets down to nominalism, like laws of logic. People are you're going to say, well, they're just descriptive, and then the other guy is saying, yes, but why? Why are they? Why is there this order we see? And you're saying it doesn't matter, but to the theist, obviously, it does matter because they're going to try to argue that these are thoughts in the mind of God or something similar, right?
Well, nominalism, the reason is because it corresponds to reality. So the reason that math and logic describe reality is because those specific formulations of math and logic correspond to reality. They're like if you say 1 plus 1 equals 2, that describes reality. If you say 1 plus 1 equals 5, that does not describe reality. And that's why 1 plus 1 equals 2 is descriptive and 1 plus 1 equals 5 isn't. So morality could be the same thing, where there is a morality out there, but I would say it describes this abstract ideal, and that's what it's referring to. Morality is referring to what the ideal world would look like for all beings with wills. That is what moral statements describe, just like 1 plus 1 describes reality. And so I'd say, but I don't think that has anything to do with the way we are going. Like, I think the way we are going is specifically due to evolution. Like, everything we feel is due to evolution. But that's not really relevant to, again, objective reality because we see lots of things illusions, delusions, fallacies, biases, all kinds of things that our brains do which have no correspondence to reality. So the way that we are going isn't relevant specifically to what is objectively true in the world. It's just how evolution designed our brains for the most part.
Yeah, yeah, I understand your argument on the morality question. That helps a lot. I think that makes a lot.
You cut out pretty bad. Give it a minute just to
Uh,
try refreshing the page.
oh, was I breaking up that entire time?
Yep. Yep.
Oh, you missed. It was just the most eloquent and brilliant speech. Um,
Yes, yes, I am right. I know. Thank you. Thank you.
yes. Well, I think would say one thing. I think yeah, I quite like the idea of orienting yourself towards an ideal. I think Christianity is not so far from that, as far as the ideal would be Christ. But uh, yeah, so it makes sense to me. Um, have you? Maybe you have, but do you have any plans to talk to a Platonist or a Neoplatonist?
Um, I might have in the past. I don't remember. I don't. I'm pretty sure I did actually. I think I talked to one earlier on, but I don't think I have any planned right now.
Yeah,
Mostly
or
because
maybe like good.
yeah, most of the people I talk to are usually religious and non-Platonists, so I don't. It doesn't. It's not really
Yeah,
a common philosophical position, so it's not something I've really looked into to try and find someone to specifically talk to.
yeah. It seems like um, you know, obviously you're an atheist, and there isn't one atheist worldview. But from watching your videos, you have a collection of beliefs um, that really cut off all philosophical arguments for God, and one of them is seems to be nominalism. Like you had this lengthy conversation with, I think, James Anderson, the guy who wrote the Lord of Non-Contradiction paper.
Hmm.
And it seems like it was good, but it was kind of frustrating to listen to because it seems at the end it was kind of like he's like, oh, well, you're a nominalist and I'm not, and then the conversation ended, and I'm like, well, yeah, but I would like to. That's the key issue. Like there should be like how a debate where that ground level.
You're cutting out again.
Did you catch any of that?
I think you said something like the
Sorry.
debate between nominalism and non people who are nominalists and people who are not nominalists. What is the compelling arguments for one or the other? Why not just disagreeing that you start with this presupposition and I don't, or something like that, and asking, well, why would one position be more reasonable than the other, something like that.
Yeah, I think it seems like the conversation gets bogged down before you get there, and that seems to, on philosophical grounds, that seems to be the important conversation to have if somebody's going to argue about the laws of logic as a indicating theism.
Yep. Yeah, I would agree. Somebody in the chat said if you turned off your video, it might decrease the amount of information and make the connection better. I don't know, but yeah.
Yeah, is that
So
good for you?
yeah, I'm fine with it. I don't mind. Lots of people I
Sure.
talk to with and without video. So yeah, I think that's it makes sense. Yeah, that you should argue that you should make some kind of an argument that nominalism is true and that there are some actual logical things that exist out there in some kind of platonic way, rather than just asserting it. Because yeah, I think that the starting position is the most reasonable starting position is that no, those don't exist for any justifiable reason because we can't discover them in any way. So I think that in presenting arguments for that would be required for that to be a reasonable position rather than just assuming it. Assuming it isn't doesn't really have any good grounds as far as I can tell.
Yeah, and it seems like most of the people who are bringing that argument to the table are coming to the table already thinking about these the laws of logic, let's say, as governing uh, principles. Like these principles aren't just descriptive; they govern, and then they don't necessarily know why they believe that. And I think, like Anderson probably does know why. I'm not. It was frustrating to me that the whole conversation went on without him getting into it. But
Well, I think he tried to. I think that was the justification for his arguments is that the the way you phrase those ideas about propositions is that they exist and their truth is independent of physical reality, and that's why you are justified in believing that they are existing things. I think that was the point he was trying to make with all of his arguments.
yeah, yeah. Well, for me anyway, that one's worth listening to again. Because it seems like some of these things come down to ground level intuitions about which position is more reasonable. I think I think free will is also one like that, where people are going to find evidence more or less convincing based on some kind of ground level intuition they have about their experience or the way the world seems to be to them. Um,
Well, I wouldn't use ground level intuition. I would say again, you'd have to have something that can differentiate imagination from reality. And so experiences like if you experienced heaven or you experienced the matrix repeatedly and it made lots of testable predictions and you can interact with it consistently, I think that's a pretty good way to tell it's not imaginary in some sense. But I don't think your intuition is definitely not a good way to differentiate the real from the imaginary.
yeah. Okay. Well, what about my experience that I could have done otherwise? Um,
I
Most people have that experience.
No, that's not an experience. That's just a feeling.
Really?
It's a post hoc feeling. Like you can't
Oh,
really
interesting.
experience you could have done otherwise. To experience you could have done otherwise, you'd have to be able to go back in time and repeat the event multiple times to be like, ah, I could have definitely done otherwise.
Yeah, making different choices.
Yeah, but other than that, it's just a post hoc feeling. So you can't actually experience that. It's just a
Yeah,
feeling people
actually,
label like that.
yeah, actually, even the time travel wouldn't work because you're aware of your time, the time traveling and the experiment. So now you've got uh,
Well,
potentially
you could
new reasons.
I've thought about this quite a bit. Like, if you set up an
Okay,
experiment where you went back in time, reset everything exactly as it was, including all of your memories, and played it back like 10 times, and then you went back forward in time and you gave yourself all of the memories, like played them to you in a video, like you recorded all of the events, and you saw, oh, I could have done otherwise in that case. I did somehow. There's something that changed there, and all of the physical stuff was the exact same. So there is a way to do it. So you'd have to like record yourself exactly as you were in each of these 10 cases and then play them back in the future and be like, ah, I changed my decision there somehow. I don't know how. So there must be free will or something like that, or some new explanation of what caused that.
yeah, yeah, yeah. This is another interesting um, nuance to your views because I think I mean you don't believe in properly basic beliefs, and I think this helps me understand why you wouldn't. the because I would say, oh, I experience a very powerful perception that I could have done otherwise. But to you, you're like, oh, that's not an experience that has like, um, let's say somebody's religious experience seems to have some sort of sense experience to it, whereas this does not. Is that the differentiation for you?
I don't think so. So,
Okay,
I mean, there are lots of philosophers that accept properly basic beliefs. Most of them don't accept free will as being one of them at all. So,
that's true. Yeah.
I don't accept properly basic beliefs because I think that all beliefs can be justified without just assuming they're basic. I don't think you need that for anything. That's why I don't accept properly basic beliefs. Just because you experience it isn't a belief that it's real. It's experience. It justifies that it's imaginary. So you can definitely justify that belief that it's in part of your imagination. But in the case of free will, like again, most philosophers just completely wholesale reject free will in its entirety, or just relabel it compatibilism, which is just kind of determinism. So free will isn't really a coherent concept, and the arguments that people present for free will again are just not compelling at all. They don't mean anything for the most part. They're just begging the questions to assuming I have a feeling, therefore it's true, essentially, and it's not really a compelling argument in philosophy. So I don't agree with that argument being very useful for anything. I don't think that I'd say most philosophers don't.
Yeah, I wish you could get Swinburne on here, or maybe a Swinburne disciple will come on and talk about his book, Mind, Brain, and Free Will, and he just came out with a new one too.
Well, Swinburne
Um,
rejects free will, so
really, I was just reading Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. He argues it's properly basic, and Mind, Brain, and Free Will, I think, is the one of the main defenses of free will.
I think so because I was talking with him about it in via email, and he said, I think he literally said, no, that kind of free will is impossible or something like that.
Huh. So, I just listened to a lecture from him about the implausibility of physical determinism. Now, maybe that was he was coming against a specific kind of determinism, but I'm fairly. I haven't. I've only read bits and pieces of Mind, Brain, and Free Will, but I'm pretty certain it's a
Oops.
uh, one of the most popular modern defenses of libertarian free will, and
I
that's
know
also he's a presentist too for that
Swinburne.
reason, because he argues with William Lane Craig, foreknowledge isn't possible, because then free will wouldn't be possible.
Yeah, I don't know. I have my emails with him here. He does mention
Okay,
that free will is, and maybe it was just specifically for this argument that we were talking about. I don't know. So,
yeah, maybe.
but yeah, I don't think. I still think that most philosophers don't take even Swinburne's arguments for free will seriously, and it's not really that compelling.
Um, yeah, the hour's sneaking away here, so I had a couple more questions I wanted to ask. Um, well, the other thing that is where you see the evidence very different from others is whether consciousness can arise, is an emergent property of the brain or not. Um, and I think your go-to is to say that that is a composition fallacy, right?
Yeah, if you say that consciousness cannot arise from physical processes, like if you take a bunch of non-conscious things and you add them together, you're not going to get a conscious thing. That's the typical argument. That's just textbook composition division fallacy. I think it's the, I don't remember which one it is. I don't, because I keep getting them confused. But yeah, just saying that because none of the parts have the pieces, therefore the whole doesn't have the property is just a composition division fallacy.
Yeah. Well, which textbook? Because I was looking that up, and yeah, I don't think um, consciousness is an emergent property of the brain. Now, I have other reasons for thinking that. Obviously, theism would come first for me, and I think that's probably true for most people you talk to. But it seems like saying bricks could make a living, breathing rhinoceros. And like a philosophy of mind textbook, I don't think is going to say it's a composition fallacy. Um,
I'm pretty
for
sure,
people,
like
it's
most
implausible.
philosophers, just agree to that it is actually a composition division fallacy. I mean, the argument they're making is that it's different categories. Like you can't
Yeah.
square root of pork chop, and they're categorically different. The specific phrasing that you can't add non-material things together to get, or non-conscious things together to get conscious, that specific phrasing is literally a composition division fallacy, but it isn't the actual argument that most philosophers use. That's not, they don't usually use those kinds of strange phrasings. So that the phrasing they use is more saying it's categorically separate kinds of things. There's consciousness is its own kind of a thing, like a square root of a pork
Right.
chop. You can't do it. They wouldn't use that particular phrasing. So only that particular phrasing is a composition division fallacy.
I see. I see. Yeah. And that's another one where I thought it was, I forget who you were talking to. And I think you were talking to an idealist who works on consciousness. And he asked you if you had enough pneumatic pumps, if you
Bernardo
filled
Castro.
yeah, if you filled a planet with pneumatic pumps, would it, could you eventually, as and switches, could you eventually come to consciousness? And you said yes.
Yep,
Um,
totally.
yeah, whereas to him that seems bonkers. Uh, yeah,
If
that
consciousness is just a process in the brain, we don't really know what the process is. But if we could replicate it in a large enough system, we can produce consciousness. Like we're going to be able to do it in a computer eventually, probably pretty soon. So yeah, there's no problem with that at all. It's going to be pretty easy.
yeah, and see people's judgments about that, and it seems to me people who are working in the field on that, their judgments about that. Um, some people are like you are like, oh, we're very close to getting the right structure, and then some people are like, we're a million miles away, or we'll never get there.
Yeah, but usually most of them agree we will get there. They all tend to agree that consciousness is a physical process in cognitive sciences and neurosciences and computer sciences. It's all just a physical process, and we're trying to get there. We have no idea how close or far away we are. We're definitely like trying to build a true AI. We have no idea how close or far we are away we are from that, but it is a thing we are working on because we do believe it is a physical process, and we are making progress in that field. We just don't know how much.
Yeah, is that in the survey of philosophers paper you mentioned, or
I
is it a
think
different
they,
survey of the
I
field?
think so. I think they mentioned some things in conscious that in the Phil surveys paper, but that's not a computer science one. The computer science one would be a different study. So that one's specifically about artificial intelligence. It doesn't mention anything about that, I don't think.
Okay. Yeah. Well. Yeah. Well, then there's a question of, yeah, how do we know we've got it or not? But yeah.
Yeah, so the cognitive science fields, those all believe the brain is physical. We have pretty good reason to believe the brain and consciousness is physical. And then can we replicate it? That's a completely different question. That's usually
Sure.
more in the computer science realm. And that isn't, I haven't really tried to find any computer science studies on those. Hasn't come up very much.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay. Yeah. Well, and it's also interesting to see philosophers respond to these things, but sometimes uh, you get people in one field draw a conclusion based on experiments, and then somebody from another field comes and looks at it and says, why would you interpret the results in that kind of way? And that's usually what it seems like. Uh, yeah, philosophers are good at drawing objections to, like, well, there are many different ways you could interpret this data or these results.
Yeah, but I
But
think philosophers are kind of useless. Scientists really don't care about anything philosophers have to say at all. Um, Scientists say, well, we're going to start with our hypothesis, make a prediction. If it works, we get it right. And anything philosophers have to say is kind of just useless. They don't even get an opinion on it because it's the only people who get to make progress in science are the people making the predictions and doing the experiments. So philosophers are just kind of useless. They don't accomplish anything in science for the most part.
well, if we get the right structure that produces consciousness, then you will be proved right. Until then, the philosophers are free to say you're misinterpreting the data and come up with other explanations, right?
Well, yeah, I
Uh,
mean, but it's the same thing as like God of the gaps. People, if there's a gap in our knowledge, what created lightning? People like to say, well, it's Zeus, and they like to make up all their different interpretations of what lightning is. But no one actually cares. Like the scientists are like, okay, you can do that, but until we get testable predictions to verify one is correct, it's all just making stuff up. So that's why scientists don't really take philosophers seriously because they don't do anything. They don't make any discoveries about the world. They don't have any way to verify that their hypotheses or descriptions of realities correspond to reality and aren't just imaginary. And so that's why science doesn't refer to philosophy at all. They don't cite philosophy papers in the academic journals for neurology or psychology or any of the big scientific fields, the STEM fields, because it's just not interesting. They don't really care.
Hmm. Yeah. You spend a lot of time and have educated yourself quite well for on in philosophy. I would have expected a more sympathetic view of the discipline. Uh, well, but before we go, I did want to ask you. Last time I asked you about the asymmetry argument from David Benatar, and I was just wondering if you had any more thoughts um,
What is it?
on that. Life, if you measure good and bad in life, and there are a number of different measurements we could do. We could do pain, pleasure. We could do fulfilled desire, unfulfilled desire, et cetera, et cetera. Most of those, the way you measure those, if you take an objective look, life is more bad than good, and this should have a great impact on how we live, on whether or not we procreate. So then brings it into an antinatalist argument. It's kind of pessimistic philosophy. Um, and I think afterwards you said something about like if an uncreate the I think you had said if the being doesn't exist yet, its will can't be imposed upon. Is that right?
Yeah, for you can't impose upon a will that doesn't exist.
Uh huh.
So yeah, I mean
Yeah.
the asymmetry argument. I mean, I'm not sure I would accept that because I don't know. I don't see any reason to think that the negative inherently outweighs the positive. It does for some people. I definitely know that from experience, but for others, it would not be the case that that's true. And so I think it's kind of like a coin flip of whether or not a life would be positive or negative. And again, it depends a lot on the technological limitations of the time period. So I think that 400 years ago, life was a lot more negative for most people than positive. But today, or in like rich countries like America, I don't think that would necessarily be the case. So I don't see this asymmetry argument working at all. I think it's purely contingent on the time frame and the comfort of the life of the people and the technological advancements of the society. So I don't see that asymmetry working in any way.
Huh. So if we think about just pain and pleasure then? It seems like most of our life, it seems to me universal that our lives contain much more pains and annoyances than they do pleasures, and the quality of those pains are higher than the pleasures we experience. For instance, if I offered you 5 minutes of the most excruciating pain possible, followed by 5 minutes of the most ecstatic pleasure possible, would you
Yes,
choose?
I would do it if you gave me like 10 hours of the most excruciating pain. I would accept it gladly for the 5 minutes. But
Really?
I'm a weird person in that sense.
Yes, that seems deeply counterintuitive to me, but that's not the first time in this conversation. So,
Yeah,
uh,
yeah, I've had to live through that multiple times, so that's a decision I've had to make.
huh,
So yeah, I think that it's subjective. So I think
yes,
the amount of because pain isn't necessarily a bad thing. Like you can like
correct.
pain. There are people who are I forget masochists who like pain a lot for very strange reasons. But so I don't think that the measure of good and bad is again choice, not pain or suffering or well-being from my model. And so choosing if you choose to experience it is totally fine. There's nothing wrong with it. And we don't really most people choose to keep living. Um, Only a small like 10% something choose to suicide. So given the fact that most people choose to keep living and go through their suffering, it's reasonable to think that it's the asymmetry argument actually goes the other way and that it's more positive to live, especially given the current time technological advancements and things. So I really don't see the asymmetry working in favor of the life is bad argument.
Huh, interesting. Uh, yeah, I don't. I do agree with you that most people want to continue living. If I think Benatar argues, yeah, well, once a life is started, we have an inherent drive to live, and that this makes extinguishing life a bad enough that we should choose to continue living. Um, but I think if uh, I think he's probably right. I think that most lives contain a greater unfulfilled desires, greater pains, and trouble than they do pleasure or fulfilled desires. You can there are other ways to measure it, and so it seems to me that if there is no meaning in this world, then consciousness is a cruel twist of evolution. Um, but it seems like you're arguing as long as we feel like life is worth living, that's all that matters.
Well, the determination of if life is worth living is you decide is if it's worth living. So it's all the choice thing. The like amount of physical pain or dissatisfaction isn't really important. Like when you play a video game, the same thing is true. Like you experience more suffering if it's like a really hard video game. You experience more suffering than you do joy, but it's still worth it. Like you spend lots of time playing the video game. So I don't see that as a good argument against like, well, should we abolish video games? Like probably not. People really like video games, even though they're really hard. Like especially like the new brand of Dark Souls challenging games people make. They're extremely difficult. They cause you more frustration than they do happiness, but people continue to play them because they find that enjoyable. So I don't think the measure of suffering compared to reward and joy is necessarily the correct measure to associate with what we're the asymmetry argument. I think the asymmetry is, do you want to do it? Like, do you choose to pursue this lifestyle regardless of whether or not it has more suffering or not? And people normally do, even in video games, it's more suffering than happiness, but they do it anyway because they value it. So I don't think the suffering versus happiness measure is the correct one. I think the choice metric is the correct one.
Okay, so um, yeah, so you would say, hey, whatever people want to do, even if it somebody's, let's say somebody has one of the worst imaginable lives, and we can imagine really bad. If at the end of it, somebody asks, "Do you wish you'd never been born?" and they say, "No, I'm glad that I lived and went through all that." In your view, they would be right, regardless of any objective measures. Is that true?
Yeah, because it's their life. So I mean, would anybody else want to live their life? Probably not. But if they were satisfied with it, then that's totally fine. There's nothing wrong with that.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. I don't know. I find myself, before I was a Christian, I was barely a theist. I probably would have liked everybody to talk me out of it. And the reason I was is because I perceived meaning everywhere and felt life didn't like I just, I don't know, couldn't get away from this perception that there was meaning in life. And it seems like to me that if there isn't, then we're life is just inconceivably bad. Um, and it seems to me like we all act as if there's meaning in the world. Um, I don't know.
Well, the meaning is just what we impose on it. So regardless of whether or not it's good or bad, the fact that we want to live is the meaning. So it again, it comes from within. Do you value being alive? Do you want to continue pursuing the things that you want to continue pursuing? Then that's that's enough to qualify as meaning in life. You don't need any more than that.
Hmm. Yeah. So just keeping ourselves busy with the things we want to do is.
Yeah, I mean that's like kind of what life is. That's the ideal of what life is.
Hmm.
Keeping yourself busy with the things you want to do. It's a good summary. I like it.
Well, I profoundly disagree, but I enjoy the conversation and the intellectual stimulation. Yeah, I appreciate your channel a lot. One of my favorites. Think it's the best. You get all the best people on,
Thanks.
um, and
Like Darth
so
Dawkins, right?
actually I couldn't. I tried. I couldn't listen to it. I was.
Yeah.
I
The
yeah.
irony is that's my most viewed video.
Yeah, see, and that's exactly the ones. My favorites are, I mean, I like the Pete Ennis ones. I like all the Rouser ones. You should have him on once a week, probably.
Oh yeah, I think
You'll
I'm having another one with him upcoming soon.
great. Yeah, that's fantastic. Yeah, all all good stuff. And I am praying for you, Tom. And so wish you the best.
Thanks. See you later.
Yep. Have a good one.